Chapter 941. Tang Wulian was truly stunned, not because Jiang Wuyu's martial soul was going to be dominated by him, but because the tyrant dragon martial soul couldn't exist under normal circumstances. Jiang Qiyue's words really made him see Jiang Wuyu through new eyes. It was indeed very interesting that his martial soul had mutated to such an extent. Tang Wulian possessed a tyrant dragon soul spirit himself, so he was naturally aware of just how powerful it was. If it weren't for the fact that his bloodline could dominate his opponent, he wouldn't be confident in his ability to defeat a six-ring soul emperor with a tyrant dragon martial soul. All right, are you ready? Jiang Qiyue's voice rang out through the speakers. Ready. Tang Wulian and Jiang Wuyu replied in unison. Begin. As soon as Jiang Qiyue's voice trailed off, Jiang Wuyu stomped his left foot into the ground, and a resounding boom rang out as his body rumbled toward Tang Wulian like a bulldozer. In the process, his body rapidly expanded, especially his upper body. After taking just a few steps, he'd already grown to over 7 meters tall, giving him the appearance of a ferocious humanoid beast. All of his skin had turned a metallic black color, and thick scales appeared all over his body like metal ore. His eyes had also turned red, and the overbearing aura emanating from his body was making even the surrounding air warp and twist. A series of soul rings emerged from beneath his feet. There were 4 purple and 2 blacks, indicating that he was indeed a 6-ring soul emperor, and this was quite a splendid soul ring configuration. His martial soul was approaching the upper limit of beast martial souls. In a contest of pure strength, even Yuan and Yui's titan giant ape may be inferior to him. One had to realize that he was only a lieutenant colonel and battalion commander in the Blood God Legion, yet he already possessed such immense power. This notion further improved Tang Wulian's appraisal of the Blood God Legion. Without using any of his soul skills, Jiang Wuyu abruptly stepped forward and launched himself into the air, hurtling directly toward Tang Wulian. At this moment, Tang Wulian's eyes also lit up. Seeing as he was facing an opponent with strength as their greatest asset by far, he was naturally going to also use strength to best him. 4 golden soul rings quickly emerged beneath his feet, and golden scales spread over his entire body. His aura also instantly swelled, and his golden dragon king bloodline fluctuations erupted outward without any reservation. In the face of Tang Wulian's aura, Jiang Wuyu's aggressive aura immediately disappeared, and even his massive body shrunk down to around 6 meters tall in midair. His red eyes were filled with incredulity, and right at this moment, Tang Wulian reached him before clenching his right golden dragon claw into a fist, then ramming into Jiang Wuyu's fist. Boom! A resounding boom rang out, causing the entire combat room to tremor violently. Tang Wulian was forced to descend back down to the ground by the force of the impact, yet Jiang Wuyu had been sent flying several dozens of meters before plummeting onto the ground. Ugh! Jiang Qiyue's cry of surprise rang out from the speakers. Jiang Wuyu had lost in that handshake contest, but in Jiang Qiyue's eyes, that was only because he hadn't used his martial soul. With her brother's tyrant dragon martial soul, his strength should definitely have been unmatched among all soul masters at or below his cultivation rank, but the scenes unfolding before her eyes certainly didn't support that conviction. Unbeknownst to her, Tang Wulian was also quite stunned. Tyrant dragons were bloodline descendants of the Golden Dragon King, and even though they weren't true dragons, they possessed some of the Golden Dragon King's bloodline. As such, they would definitely be severely impacted by Tang Wulian's Golden Dragon King bloodline, as perfectly evidenced by how his tyrant dragon soul spirit had completely succumbed to his bloodline in the past. As such, he had thought that Jiang Wuyu would be completely crushed by him. As it turned out, his bloodline had indeed severely impacted Jiang Wuyu, but during their clash, Tang Wulian discovered that Jiang Wuyu had still managed to unleash an immense amount of power that exceeded 100 tons at the very least. It wasn't that his bloodline intimidation wasn't working, it was that Jiang Wuyu's battle intent was simply far too powerful. Drawing upon that vehement battle intent, Jiang Wuyu was able to nullify some of the effects of his bloodline advantage. Jiang Wuyu clambered to his feet, and despite the fact that he clearly emerged second best from that clash, he hadn't been injured. Tyrant dragons were renowned for their powerful physical bodies, and that applied to both defensive and offensive prowess. However, Tang Wulian's irrefutably terrifying power had well and truly shaken him. Among people of the same age or younger than him, he'd never encountered anyone with superior strength to him. He lost to Tang Wulian in that handshake contest, but he could still draw consolation from the notion that neither of them had unleashed their martial souls. However, he was fighting with all his might now, yet he was still completely no match for Tang Wulian. What was even more astonishing to him was that his martial soul and bloodline, both of which he'd always been immensely proud of, had been completely dominated by this newbie. In the instant that Tang Wulian released his Golden Dragon King aura, he felt as if his bloodline had congealed in his veins, and he was struck by an innate urge to bow to him in subordination. Only after elevating his battle intent with all his might did he just barely manage to repress that urge. Golden soul rings? What's his martial soul? After Jiang Wuyu rose to his feet, Tang Wulian immediately rushed toward him. Opponents that could pose any resistance against him in terms of pure strength were very rare, and he wanted to take full advantage of sparring with such a partner. His blood essence vortex began to rotate at a high speed, and his blood essence power flowed toward his lower body at his behest. His power was instantly transmitted into his left foot, and in the instant he stomped that foot into the ground, the entire combat room quaked violently, as did the internal protective barrier, which seemed to be nearing the limit of its tolerance capacity. Under the effect of his fearsome strength, his body was propelled forward and reached an unprecedented speed. Following his battle against the demonic enchantress, Tang Wulian had developed a strong urge to improve his own speed. However, Mu Yi had told him while teaching him the abilities of the body sect that as a disciple of the body sect, his top priority was to learn to control his own body. After mastering full control over one's own body, they would no longer have any glaring weaknesses, as the cultivation method of the body sect allowed one to perfectly integrate one's soul power and strength to provide any enhancements required. Tang Wulian was learning to cultivate his entire body from Mu Yi, as opposed to a certain body part. In particular, this feeling became more and more pronounced to him after he attained his blood essence vortex. Now, he wanted to see just what kind of speed he could achieve if he were to unleash all of his power. His blood essence vortex sank downward, and all of his blood essence was injected into his left foot in an instant. Right as he stomped his left foot into the ground, he was struck by a slightly painful throbbing sensation, which was clearly a result of excessive injection of blood essence power. Jiang Qiyue listened to the deafening boom echoing within the combat room from outside, and she looked on in a flabbergasted manner as a bolt of golden lightning suddenly flashed past her eyes. In the next instant, Jiang Wuyu, who had only just risen to his feet and released his third soul skill, was sent flying like a cannonball by the golden lightning. He crashed heavily into the other wall of the combat room and was adhered firmly to its surface. Tang Wulian appeared in the same place that Jiang Wuyu had just been standing, and he looked down at his own fist. Much to his surprise, after raising his speed to the maximal extent, even his strength seemed to have increased. His power output had to have been enhanced by his increased speed. High speed was one of the components of force output. If he had also unleashed his golden dragon shocks the heavens with that attack, it would have been even more devastating. Jiang Wuyu's body slowly slid down, and at this moment, he was bleeding from both his nostrils and his mouth, while his brain had gone completely blank. In that instant, he felt as if he'd been struck headfirst by a high-speed soul train, and it was as if his entire body were about to fall apart at the seams. He had already used his third soul skill, the tyrant dragon body, which significantly enhanced his strength and defenses, yet it had all been to no avail. At this moment, his opponent's bloodline aura was infiltrating his bloodline in a frenzy, and the urge to bow in subordination was growing even more pronounced, to the extent that it was even quickly nullifying his battle intent. He had never felt so frustrated before. He had definitely underestimated his opponent, but Tang Wulian was so young. As one of the most elite young soldiers of the Blood God Legion, why couldn't he look down on his opponent? How could his strength be so terrifying? Right at this moment, Jiang Qiyue was greeted by the sight of Tang Wulian's fourth golden soul ring lighting up, and she hurriedly yelled into the microphone in her hand, "Stop! The battle's over." Chapter 942. Jiang Wuyu had already been reduced to such a sorry state by Tang Wulian before he had used the power of his golden soul rings. If he were to use his most powerful soul ring now, there was no way that Jiang Wuyu would be able to defend himself. However, Tang Wulian merely smiled and ignored Jiang Qiyue's panicked cry. A golden halo spread from beneath his feet, quickly proliferating outward. Tang Wulian strode toward Jiang Wuyu's direction, and soon, the golden halo that seemed to be filled with complex patterns had enshrouded Jiang Wuyu within. Almost at the exact same moment, Jiang Wuyu let loose an extremely boisterous dragon's roar, and the back of his massive body also instantly straightened. His black scales turned into a dark golden color, and all of his fear and inferiority instantly vanished as his blank mind was filled with extreme excitement. At this moment, Jiang Wuyu felt as if his blood had been set alight, and his soul power was multiplying at a rapid rate. He had never felt so powerful in his life, and the overflowing power within his body struck him with the urge to tear heaven and earth apart with his bare hands. Roar! 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 A string of enraged roars erupted out of his mouth, and the dark golden color on his body glowed brighter and brighter, making it look as if he'd been entirely basked within a vast expanse of golden light. Even his 6 soul rings had taken on a faint golden color. He reflexively glanced at his own body to find that his tyrant dragon scales, which had originally been quite uneven, had become a lot more uniform than before. They now resembled even and uniform rhomboids, and the dark golden light seemed to have given his scales more substance. What was even more exhilarating to Jiang Wuyu was the sense of overwhelming strength that was relentlessly surging out of his body. Even if he were to face a barn right now, he'd be confident in his ability to tear it apart. After breaking his 9th Golden Dragon King seal, Tang Wuling discovered that all 4 of his Golden Dragon King soul skills had evolved, and this was something that had never happened before. The soul skill that had evolved most prominently was his 4th soul skill, the Violet Golden Dragon domain. The area of his domain had increased by over 2-fold, and its effects had also become more potent. Jiang Wuyu was enhanced so significantly by Tang Wuling's domain as his tyrant dragon bloodline was extremely close to Tang Wuling's Golden Dragon King bloodline, and his powers had increased by more than 50%. There was an extremely drastic change from being dominated by Tang Wuling's bloodline to being enhanced by it instead. Tang Wuling withdrew his golden soul rings and said, "Let's stop here for today, superior." Without the enhancements from the golden soul rings, all of Jiang Wuyu's enhanced power instantly vanished, and his scales returned to normal, as did his aura. However, the pain that he'd been struck by as a result of their last collision was alleviated by the enhancement effects. What kind of ability was that? Why did it make me feel so much more powerful? Jiang Wuyu stared at Tang Wuling with intense focus in his eyes. At this point, he had already completely forgotten that this man was his rival in love. As a member of the Blood God Legion, he revered power above all else, and this evoked within him an extremely strong sense of curiosity toward Tang Wuling. Tang Wuling smiled and said, "That could be because our bloodlines have shared origins." He couldn't release his tyrant dragon soul spirit in here as this place wasn't big enough to contain it. "Our bloodlines have shared origins. What's your martial soul?" Jiang Wuyu asked in a perplexed manner. Tang Wuling replied, "This has nothing to do with my martial soul. It's solely related to my bloodline." Jiang Wuyu was still quite befuddled. "Wait a minute. Your aura suggests that you're a 5-ring soul king, so why do you only have 4 soul rings? And why are they golden?" A wry smile appeared on Tang Wuling's face. "That's a bit of a long story. To put it in simple terms, those aren't my soul rings. They're a bloodline ability of mine. My martial soul is something else." He clearly didn't plan to give an in-depth explanation. Jiang Wuyu continued, "How long can you maintain that last ability for?" Tang Wuling replied, "I should be able to maintain it for half an hour with no issues." Jiang Wuyu's eyes immediately lit up. Half an hour? He had been enhanced to an unimaginably powerful degree just then. This ability, combined with the melee combat prowess Tang Wuling had displayed, instantly made him look at Tang Wuling through new eyes. Tang Wuling was feeling rather uncomfortable in the face of Jiang Wuyu's intense scrutiny. "Superior, about those 1,000 accolades." "Ah, yes, I'll give them to you right away." Jiang Wuyu draped an arm over Tang Wuling's shoulder before raising his own bracelet to transfer 1,000 accolades over to him. Everything that happened just then was just a misunderstanding, so just forget about it, brother. You said you already have a girlfriend, right? Jiang Wuyu asked with a friendly look on his face. Tang Wuling couldn't really just turn a cold shoulder to him, so he nodded and replied, "That's right. I already have a girlfriend, and we love each other very much." Then this was even more of a misunderstanding. "I feel like the special service department doesn't really suit you all that well. How about you come to my Iron Wool Corps 1st Battalion? With your talents, you'll be able to earn accolades extremely quickly. I'll get our brothers to help you out a bit, and I guarantee you that I'll get you up to captain rank in a year at most. When that time comes, you can be my vice battalion commander. What do you think? Also, as soon as you come over to my battalion, I'll make you the commander of the strongest company in my battalion. You can even beat me in battle. No one's going to have any objections to this arrangement." Vice battalion commander in a year? That seems to be quite close to the major rank. Tang Wuling was rather tempted by this offer. Right at this moment, the doors of the combat room were flung open, and 2 people walked in from outside. "How dare you try to take my colleague, Jiang Wuyu?" The one walking at the forefront wasn't Jiang Qiyue. Instead, it was Long Yakshu, who had rushed over here after being informed of what was happening. Jiang Qiyue had given Long Yakshu a call right before Tang Wuling and Jiang Wuyu's sparring match had commenced. She was still very grateful toward Tang Wuling for not eating her into bankruptcy. However, after Long Yakshu arrived, she was immediately greeted by the sight of Jiang Wuyu slinging an arm across Tang Wuling's shoulder and tempting him with an alluring offer. Jiang Wuyu's immediately sagged like a deflated balloon at the sight of her, and he hurriedly put on a fawning smile as he said, "I'm not trying to undermine you or anything, Yakshu. It's just that it would be a terrible waste if Brother Tang doesn't come over to our blood division with his melee combat prowess." Long Yakshu harumphed coldly, promising military ranks in private is prohibited in our legion. "I'm going to tell Division Commander Shu about this. Also, Wuling has only just come to our legion, and he's still very unfamiliar with everything here. Our special service department also needs someone like him, so at the very least, he won't be going to a battle unit in the immediate future. At this point in time, he'll be more useful to our special service department. If you want to take him, you'll have to get past me first." If it was someone else standing in Long Yakshu's place, then Jiang Wuyu would most likely immediately get into an argument with them. However, he was completely powerless in the face of Long Yakshu, and raised his arms in a resigned manner as he said, "All right, I surrender. I won't try to take Wuling from your department." Long Yakshu grabbed Tang Wuling away from Jiang Wuyu, and said, "Let's go." Tang Wuling was dragged out of the combat room by Long Yakshu, and even now, Jiang Qiyue still had a strange expression on her face as she looked at him. After they departed, she immediately turned to her brother, and asked, "Brother, is this Tang Wuling really that freakishly strong? You looked like you stood no chance against him at all." A sour expression appeared on Jiang Wuyu's face. "I don't know what happened. Either, his aura seems to naturally dominate mine. That wasn't an actual battle anyway. Perhaps I'd have a chance if I fought with all my power and used my battle armor as well, but he seemed to have held back the entire time as well, so I'm not confident in my ability to beat him." "Do you know how old he is?" Jiang Qiyue replied. "I heard from Sister Yakshu that he's 21. Chapter 943. A peculiar look immediately appeared on Jiang Wuyu's face. Even in the Blood God Legion, which was filled with prodigies, he was considered to be the cream of the crop. However, he was already 28 years old, yet there was a 21-year-old opponent whom he wasn't confident in defeating in battle. This was a massive disparity. Soul Masters progressed at the fastest rate prior to turning to 30. After that, one's body would be completely mature and cease to develop, thereby resulting in a drastic decrease in the speed of one's cultivation. As such, almost all titled Douluos had forged strong foundations prior to turning 30 years old, and the most powerful beings on the continent were all 8-ring soul Douluos or even titled Douluos already before turning 30. Jiang Wuyu was very confident that he'd be able to become a titled Douluo in the future, but that would have to wait until he was at least over 40 years old. However, with Tang Wuling's current powers, he seemed to be able to get to that point even before turning 30. If he could continue to develop at this rate, he would surely stand at the pinnacle of the entire legion someday. What happened? Long Yakshu asked in an enraged manner as soon as she dragged Tang Wuling out of the combat rooms. Tang Wuling replied, "I was challenged to a sparring match as soon as he left, and all we did was spar." Long Yakshu was looking at him in a skeptical manner. "Really?" "Yes," Tang Wuling replied with a nod. He liked Jiang Wuyu's personality, and he felt even more inclined to hide some details for his sake after discovering the fact that he possessed a tyrant dragon martial soul. Long Yakshu harumphed coldly, "But guys always picking fights everywhere. You should just ignore him in the future. He didn't hurt you, did he?" "No, Superior Jiang held back for my sake," Tang Wuling replied with a smile. Long Yakshu hadn't seen a sparring match, so she harumphed coldly, "That guy's got nothing more than brute strength. Come to think of it, you two are one of a kind. It's no wonder that he holds you in such high regard. However, you have to constantly remember that you're a member of our special service department. Got it?" "Yes, Superior." Long Yakshu continued, "I only managed to source one customer for you before I was called here by Qiyue. Let's go to the forging room. The customer's already waiting for us there." "Sure." Tang Wuling was very enthusiastic about earning accolades. After all, his goal was to rise up the ranks as quickly as possible. The forging rooms were also situated in the living area, but in contrast with the combat rooms, the forging rooms were relegated to a more secluded location. The soundproofing materials here were quite limited, so they had no choice but to place the forging rooms here in order to not affect anyone else. Long Yakshu said to Tang Wuling as she walked, "I've invested everything I have in you, so if the customer asks for something that you can't do, don't agree to their request. If you ruin our reputation with the very first job you do, we'll be in big trouble." "All right." Tang Wuling didn't provide any in-depth explanation. The truth would speak for itself. Sure enough, after arriving at the forging room, there was already someone waiting for them. This was a female military official who appeared to be around 30 years of age, and her epaulets indicated that she was a lieutenant colonel. Her disposition was quite warm and gentle, and she wasn't particularly beautiful, but she was quite charismatic and approachable. Sister Luni. Long Yakshu called out in an intimate voice before rushing forward and latching onto the female lieutenant colonel's arm. Luni smiled as she cast her gaze toward Tang Wuling and asked, "Is this handsome lad the blacksmith you were talking about?" Long Yakshu nodded in response. "That's right. He's new here, and he only just received his military rank, but he's already a second lieutenant. He's currently undertaking his special training under my supervision, and he's a very good blacksmith as well." A hint of a surprise flashed through Luni's eyes upon hearing this. She had never heard of a newbie being granted the rank of second lieutenant right away. Tang Wuling appeared to be quite young, but she wasn't skeptical of his forging skills in the slightest. Instead, she said in a very polite manner, "Please look after me." Tang Wuling hurriedly returned some pleasantries before opening the door of the forging room. "Please come in, superiors." The setup inside the forging room was very simple. At the center of the room was naturally a forging bench, and there were many types of uncommon metals placed on the metal shelves on either side. Most of them had been brought here by Tang Wuling, and the rest were sourced by Long Yakshu. Luni glanced at the uncommon metals on the shelves and smiled as she said, "Looks like you've got a good supply of everything here. What levels of service do you offer?" Tang Wuling replied, "I can forge anything according to your requirements. What kind of metal would you like to use? I can also refine existing items that you already have." He didn't immediately reveal to them that he was a saint blacksmith, partially because they may not believe him anyway, and he also didn't want to scare them. He was quite new here, so it was best not to be too much of a show-off. He'd simply let his forging skills speak for him. After all, a reputation had to be forged through actions rather than words. "You seem very confident. I'm not asking for much." Light flashed from Luni's hand as she spoke, and a metal tube appeared in her grasp. The metal tube was around a meter long with a diameter of approximately 10 centimeters. It appeared to be the barrel of a weapon. Luni continued, "Due to excessive usage, this cannon barrel of mine has become slightly misshapen, so I'd like you to repair it. If possible, would you be able to infuse some suitable uncommon metals into it as well? I'm sure that'll make it more durable. I tend to shoot at quite a high frequency for long periods at a time, so it's very important for me to have a good barrel." Tang Wuling accepted the barrel from her and inspected the outside before taking a look at the inside. From the outside, the barrel seemed to only be slightly misshapen, but looking at it through the hole, he discovered that the interior of the metal tube was filled with pits and bumps, clearly a result of damage from sustained high temperatures. This barrel was no longer usable. "How many accolades are you prepared to pay for this barrel, superior?" Tang Wuling asked. Luni faltered slightly upon hearing this before chuckling. "Shouldn't you be the one to decide on a price?" Tang Wuling replied, "That's true, but I have a range of plans to repair this barrel, and the accolades required will be different depending on which plan you choose. These plans can be roughly split up into 3 types. The first one will just be a standard repair, and that'll only cost 100 accolades. The second plan is the one that you suggested, which involves adding some other metals to make it more durable. The material used for your barrel is already quite good. I can tell that it's purple iron, which has a very high melting point. The fact that it was damaged to such an extent despite the material used suggests that your weapon is extremely powerful. So even if other metals are infused into it, the barrel would still most likely be damaged in the future. Hence, the third plan I can suggest to you is for me to forge a brand new barrel of the exact same dimensions as this one, and the new barrel will be completely free from the issue of heat damage." Luni was quite intrigued to hear this. "How much will you charge for those last 2 plans? You're telling me you can resolve the issue of my barrel overheating once and for all? That's going to be very difficult considering I'm using a weapon with both high power and high shot frequency." Tang Wuling scratched his head and said, "I don't know much about soul weapons, but it shouldn't be an issue for me. For the second plan, I'll charge 1,000 accolades, but as for the third plan, that'll cost you at least 5,000 accolades." Luni was quite alarmed by Tang Wuling's quotes. 1,000 accolades was enough to do a lot of things, and 5,000 accolades was enough to promote Tang Wuling from second lieutenant to lieutenant. Even to her, that was quite a considerable sum. "Don't spout nonsense, Wuling." Long Yakshu hurriedly interjected. She was on very good terms with Luni, who was also very popular in the entire legion. She had invited Luni to be their first customer so she could promote Tang Wuling's forging room, and she was quite aghast that Tang Wuling was stating such astronomical prices. Tang Wuling smiled, and both Long Yakshu and Luni were momentarily entranced by how handsome he was. His smile was so pure and filled with positive energy. "How about this? Seeing as you're my first customer, I can implement the first plan free of charge, and you can gauge my skills based on that. Even without adding any metals, I'm confident that I can bolster the durability of your barrel by at least 10%. After that, you can decide on whether you want to implement one of the other 2 plans. What do you think?" Luni looked at Tang Wuling and replied, "All right, I'll take the free option first then." She had always been quite steadfast and never made rash decisions, so she certainly wasn't going to splurge her accolades just because Tang Wuling was handsome. At the same time, she wanted to see just what this confident young man was capable of. Tang Wuling carried the barrel over to the forging bench and took a rough glance at it before pressing a button, then tossing the barrel straight into the furnace. He did a few stretches, and it had been a very long time since he'd last forged, so his heart was filled with excitement. After becoming a saint blacksmith, forging had become second nature to him, and it was also something that he loved. Chapter 944. He stood on the spot and fell into a completely calm and silent state. Even when faced with such a simple task, he still treated it with caution and a serious attitude. This was a gesture of his respect toward forging itself. The best furnace always ensured a quick calcination process, and when the barrel rose up onto his forging bench again, it was already red hot. Even the temperature in the forging room had risen significantly. Tang Wuling spread open his arms, and his pair of soul-refined heavy silver hammers immediately appeared in his hands. He brought his right arm down without any preparatory movements. Bam! One side of the barrel was completely flattened. Arg! Long Yakshu couldn't help but let loose a cry of surprise. "It's over." Even Luni couldn't help but furrow her brows upon seeing this. She had had her cannon barrel repaired by blacksmiths on many occasions, and the process wasn't very complex. After being calcined to a high temperature, the barrel would be adjusted back to its original shape using a mold, then solidified and cooled. Purple iron was a very strong material in itself, so it could be calcined on many occasions without any issues. However, Tang Wuling had immediately flattened one side of the barrel with a single hammer strike. It was certainly an indication that he possessed immense strength, but was he really repairing the barrel? Wasn't this destruction instead? After flattening the barrel, it wouldn't be a simple task to repair it back to its original shape. This man was quite confident, but he didn't seem to be very reliable. "What are you doing, Wuling?" Long Yakshu couldn't help but yell in a horrified manner. However, Tang Wuling seemed to have not heard her at all. His heavy silver hammers fell at a rapid rate, and after a few resounding booms, the cylindrical cannon barrel had been completely flattened. Long Yakshu couldn't help but bury her face into her hand, as she couldn't bear to watch this any longer. "I'm sorry, Sister Luni. I'll buy you another one. I really didn't know things were going to turn out like this." She was full of remorse that she'd been led into trusting Tang Wuling's forging abilities. A wry smile also appeared on Luni's face. Her cannon barrel hadn't been very expensive to make, but she'd used it for a long time and naturally developed an attachment to it. The fact that it had been ruined by Tang Wuling in such a brutal manner made her feel quite uncomfortable. Even as easygoing as she was, she couldn't help but develop a very negative first impression of Tang Wuling. He was clearly just bluffing when he didn't have any skills. And what was that nonsense about 3 plans? It was all just a laughable joke. Thump, thump, thump. Tang Wuling's hammers fell in an extremely constant and rhythmic manner. His hammer blows came thick and fast, and during the brief conversation between Long Yakshu and Luni, the cannon barrel had already been completely flattened into a metal plate. The metal plate was then gradually smashed into a metal clump by his hammers. The process was very quick, and during Long Yakshu's apology, the cannon barrel had already been reduced to an unrecognizable lump. Long Yakshu couldn't take it any longer and wanted to stop Tang Wuling from embarrassing both her and himself any further, but Luni laid a hand on her arm to stop her. "Let's see what he's capable of." Thump, thump, thump. The hammer blows gradually became heavier and faster, to the extent that it sounded like a torrential storm raining down upon a banana leaf, creating almost a single constant sound. All of a sudden, a beam of light abruptly rose up into the air. The light ascended for over 6 feet, and a faint dragon's roar could be heard reverberating throughout the room. "This is Both Long Yakshu and Lu Ni's pupils contracted drastically. They weren't blacksmiths, but they were quite knowledgeable and experienced. The two of them exclaimed in unison, "First grade thousand refinement." Lu Ni really liked this cannon barrel precisely because it was constructed from thousand refined metal, but it was only the most ordinary of thousand refinements. After all, this was only a sole weapon component, so it was already quite rare for thousand refined metals to be used on such parts. However, she had never heard of a blacksmith who was capable of elevating an existing thousand refined metal to a first grade thousand refined level. No, this wasn't even normal first grade thousand refinement. The best first grade thousand refinements only had light rising up to 5 feet, but the light rising up from the piece of purple iron had definitely reached over 6 feet. On top of that, what was that dragon's roar they were hearing? Even Tang Wulian wouldn't be able to upgrade a piece of thousand refined metal on his own, but he was able to accomplish this with his soul refined forging hammers. The main trait of soul refinement was its ability to bestow intelligence upon a piece of metal. An intelligent piece of metal could combine as one with its master to form a spiritual connection. The forging process just then appeared to have been quite simple, but it had actually been a product of brilliant craftsmanship. Tang Wulian had communicated with his heavy silver hammer to alter the internal structure of the purple iron, forcibly enhancing its quality without resulting in a decrease in mass. In reality, what he was doing was akin to using a cannon to kill a mosquito. It expended a lot of effort, and under normal circumstances, it would be much more practical to just create a new barrel from scratch. However, his forging room had only just opened, and he wanted to show off his abilities to attract as many customers as possible in order to earn more accolades. The light persisted for over 10 seconds before finally slowly fading away. Tang Wulian's hammer blows became lighter after this, but the frequency became even faster. The piece of metal quickly changed shape and began to flatten out before slowly being molded by his heavy silver hammers. Long Yakshu could even see that one of Tang Wulian's forging hammers had slowly changed into the shape of a long rod, and the piece of purple iron was wrapped around that rod with the help of his other hammer, thereby making the piece of metal adopt its original shape as a cannon barrel again. Tang Wulian was moving far too quickly, and the cannon barrel had already reverted back to its original form even before they'd recovered from the astonishment of witnessing the first grade thousand refinement that had just taken place. Sizzle. The cannon barrel was plunged into water to be cooled. After it re-emerged, it had been completely repaired and enhanced. "It's done now, superior." Tang Wulian offered the cannon barrel to Lu Ni with both hands. Lu Ni looked down to find that this cannon barrel was identical in size to what it was in the past, but all of the warping had vanished, and it resembled a brand new barrel. However, in contrast with how it had been in the past, a layer of fine patterns had appeared over its surface, making it look as if it were more substantial somehow. After accepting the barrel, she discovered that it was still rather warm. She took a look inside to find that the internal surface was as smooth as a mirror, and the feeling of it in her hand had seemed to be quite different compared to in the past. She gently squeezed various parts of the barrel, and even though she hadn't tested it out, she could tell from the first grade thousand refinement that the barrel had become at least 30% more durable than it was in the past. That 10% figure was just him being modest. "Sorry for making you worry, but if I didn't prepare the barrel in that manner, it would have been very difficult to increase its quality without adding any other metals. You should be able to use it right away, and it'll last a lot longer before you'll need to have it repaired again," Tang Wulian said with a smile. Lu Ni exhaled as she cast her gaze toward Tang Wulian's hands, only to find that his forging hammers had already disappeared. She turned toward Long Yakshu and said, "You've truly found a brilliant partner, little Shui. I really am envious of your luck. Tang Wulian, do you need any more investors?" Tang Wulian shook his head in response. "Apologies, superior, but I no longer require any additional investment." Of course he didn't need any further investors. He had only reluctantly agreed to be in this partnership with Long Yakshu as she had good and pure intentions. There was no way he was going to share his earnings with anyone else. Lu Ni held the cannon barrel and said, "I'm starting to regret my decision. If I'd been aware of your skills from the very beginning, I would have at least asked you to implement the second plan. I'm very curious, what would the third plan entail?" Tang Wulian replied, "Cannon barrels need to be constructed from metals that can hold their shape even in the face of high heat. If you want a barrel that'll last you for a lifetime, it has to possess self-regenerative abilities, and the material used also has to be strengthened even further. The third plan would involve fusing 2 more types of uncommon metals into the barrel, then elevate it to the spirit refinement level. After that, it'll be able to repair itself even without any circuits, and you'll be able to use it for a long time without fear of damage. At the same time, you'll have the option of carving a soul circuit onto the barrel to increase the power output of your weapon. It'll be quite expensive to do this, but I think it's well worth the price. Of course, that only applies to your high power and high frequency weapon. For a weapon of lower power or shot frequency, such a heavy investment would simply be overkill." Lu Ni couldn't help but exclaim upon hearing this. "Spirit refinement? Why, you're a 5th rank blacksmith. Wait, no, you can fuse metals to form alloys, so you have to be a 6th rank blacksmith." Tang Wulian smiled and said, "I can complete some simple soul refinements as well." He had displayed enough of his skills already, so it was time to lay the cards down on the table. Soul refinement. "You're a saint blacksmith." Both Lu Ni and Long Yakshu felt as if their brains were about to short circuit. He was a saint blacksmith. There wasn't even a saint blacksmith in the entire Blood God Legion. In fact, there were only a total of less than 20 saint blacksmiths on the entire continent. The Blood God Legion was such a secluded place, even if the military wanted to send a saint blacksmith to them, no saint blacksmith would be willing to come here, and who could force them to come here against their will? As such, the most accomplished blacksmith in the entire Blood God Legion was only a 6th rank blacksmith. Chapter 945. As such, how could the two of them not be stunned by the notion that Tang Wulian was able to complete soul refinement? Tang Wulian smiled and said, "The only way to back up one's words is through actions. It would be much appreciated if you could introduce more customers to me, superior." The second plan cost 1,000 accolades, which was very expensive. The third plan would cost at least 5,000 accolades, which was even more expensive. But if the blacksmith in question were a saint blacksmith, then it really wasn't expensive at all. Lu Ni looked down at the barrel in her hands, and she almost didn't dare to imagine that a saint blacksmith had just served her. This was simply incredible. What were saint blacksmiths? They were masters of their craft who could forge foundational metals for red mechas and complete the initial production of suits of 3-word battle armor. Saint blacksmiths stood at the pinnacle of the forging world and were extremely important figures even in the context of the entire continent. One had to realize that there was only a single divine blacksmith on the entire Douluo continent, yet there was a 21-year-old saint blacksmith standing before her right now. Who was to say he wouldn't become the next divine blacksmith? Long Yakshu's body shuddered slightly at the sight of the benevolent smile on Tang Wulian's face, and her expression had clearly changed as she appraised him. Lu Ni took a deep breath and carefully stowed the barrel away, then pressed on her blood god bracelet a few times. "Thank you for your efforts. Please accept these accolades." Tang Wulian immediately replied, "I agreed to do this for free, superior." Lu Ni insisted, "No, I can't accept something so precious for free, and I still hope to be able to employ your services in the future. Apologies for my rudeness earlier, Master Tang." Tang Wulian no longer made any effort to turn her down and accepted her accolades to find that she'd given him 500 accolades rather than 100. In reality, 500 accolades really wasn't a lot considering how much she's improved her cannon barrel. After bidding farewell to Lu Ni, who was still rather reluctant to leave, Long Yakshu closed the door of the forging room before turning to Tang Wulian with an intense look in her eyes. Tang Wulian was feeling rather unsettled in the face of her intense scrutiny, and he asked, "Is there something you want to say, superior?" Long Yakshu suddenly interrogated in an enraged voice, "Why didn't you tell me before this?" Tang Wulian heaved a resigned sigh. "Would you have believed me if I told you that I was a saint blacksmith?" "I wouldn't," Long Yakshu replied without any hesitation, "but that's beside the point. Whether I would have believed you is another matter altogether. You still did the wrong thing by not telling me everything beforehand." "All right, I'm sorry." Tang Wulian immediately surrendered. It was definitely not wise to bicker with a woman over such an issue. PFFT. Long Yakshu suddenly burst into laughter, and a gentle look appeared in her eyes as she appraised Tang Wulian. "Thanks for handing me such a lucrative deal. How about I take less of your profits?" Being able to open a forging workshop in partnership with the saint blacksmith was a massive stroke of fortune, and she was going to profit immensely from now on. "Sure. How much of your share are you willing to give up?" Tang Wulian immediately agreed without any hesitation. He was quite reluctant to hand over 50% of his earnings as well. "Just kidding." Long Yakshu opened the door and departed as she giggled. "Just keep working for me, little Tang." Tang Wulian was left feeling rather speechless. Long Yakshu almost sprinted over to the control center. As the vice commander of the special service department, she had the right to enter this place. "Report," she yelled in a loud voice after pressing the doorbell. "Come in." Long Tianwu's deep voice sounded in reply. The door was opened, and Long Yachu immediately rushed in an elated manner. Father, I have something to tell you, she said in an excited voice. However, Long Tianwu's expression suddenly fell slightly, and he scolded. We're currently at work, so you should be referring to me as superior. At the same time, he was rather surprised. His daughter had always been quite calm and steadfast, so why was she suddenly so excited? Long Yachu felt as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over her parade, and she harumphed. If you don't want to hear it, then I'll leave. You better not regret this. Long Tianwu faltered slightly before bursting into laughter. All right, I'll listen. What do you want to tell me? However, Long Yachu turned away in a smug manner and said, I don't feel like telling you anymore. I'm going now, superior. She then immediately turned to leave. Long Tianwu rose to his feet and chuckled. All right, my precious little daughter. There's no one else, so I shouldn't have been so strict and dogmatic, and I apologize. Only then did Long Yachu turn around again with a content look on her face. Father, I have some good news for you. We've stumbled upon a great treasure. Long Tianwu appraised his daughter with a perplexed expression. Long Yachu explained, I'm talking about Tang Wuling. Tang Wuling? What about him? Long Tianwu asked, isn't he undertaking his special training with you? Did he discover a new continent or something? Long Yachu replied, I really do feel like I've discovered a new continent. Did you know that he's a blacksmith as well? Long Tianwu replied, that's not really a surprise. All aspiring battle armor masters will take on a secondary occupation that's related to their battle armor. The only thing that's noteworthy is that not many people choose forging as their secondary occupation. Long Yachu continued, do you know what rank blacksmith he is? Long Tianwu mused, looking at you now, it's not hard to guess that he must be quite a high-ranked blacksmith. Could it be that he's already a 5th ranked blacksmith who's capable of spirit refinement? That would be quite remarkable at his age. Long Yachu immediately pouted with displeasure. Do you think your daughter is that excitable? Spirit refinement is nothing. Long Tianwu immediately burst into laughter. Spirit refinement is nothing. You're only saying that because you don't know how difficult spirit refinement is. Wait, are you saying? A surprised expression finally began to appear on Long Tianwu's face as he realized where this conversation was going. Long Yachu nodded and chuckled. That's right. Not only can he spirit refine, he can even soul refine. He's a 7th rank Saint Blacksmith, and he's definitely the youngest Saint Blacksmith in history. Long Tianwu drew a sharp breath upon hearing this, but as opposed to being excited, he fell completely silent. What is it, father? This is fantastic news. Shouldn't you be happy? Long Yachu asked in a confused manner. However, Long Tianwu sighed in response. If we were talking about someone else, I would naturally be overjoyed, and this is indeed fantastic news for our Blood God Legion. But Tang Wuling's identity is rather special. What do you mean? Long Yachu asked. Long Tianwu explained. He possesses immense combat prowess, a powerful bloodline, and he's a Saint Blacksmith. What place do you think is capable of nurturing such a brilliant young prodigy? Long Yachu asked. Isn't he from the Tang sect? Long Tianwu replied. Even the Tang sect can't nurture a freakish talent like him. He's blessed by the heavens, and under normal circumstances, he would definitely rise to the pinnacle of the entire continent in the future. On top of that, he's very handsome, and I'm sure that'll only draw more people to him. However, I have to remind you to keep your distance from him. You're my only daughter, and I want you to be safe. Long Yachu wore a perplexed expression as she asked. What are you saying, father? I don't understand. Long Tianwu replied in a serious voice. I verified Tang Wuling's identity with the Tang sect, and they told me that he's the leader of the current generation of Shrek 7 monsters. Do you understand now? Long Yachu shuddered upon hearing this. She had heard far too many stories and legends about Shrek Academy and Shrek 7 monsters ever since she was a child. Never would she have thought that the newbie soldier who was following her around and referring to her as superior every day would be the leader of Shrek 7 monsters. Shrek City was destroyed, and Shrek Academy was razed to the ground. As a member of Shrek 7 monsters, he has a duty to revive Shrek Academy, and that was why he was sent here. The vice palace master of the Tang sect's Douluo palace sent him here so he could grow and develop away from the chaos on the continent, and also to help him attain more influence in the military. In the aftermath of Shrek Academy's destruction, all of the major powers are scrutinizing those with connections to Shrek Academy, and all of those people are also waiting for an opportunity. Chapter 946. The supporters of Shrek Academy will never give up on trying to revive it, yet the revival of Shrek Academy is something that none of the major powers on the continent want to see. Hence, you can imagine how much pressure he'll be under in the future. A man like him is destined to have an extraordinary life, but also one that's fraught with peril. Do you understand what I'm getting at? Long Yachu said, but our Blood God Legion is almost completely independent from the Federation. What does this have to do with anything? No one will try to hunt him down here. Long Tianwu slapped his own forehead in a resigned manner. What I'm saying is that he's going to leave someday. You silly girl. He's not going to stay in the Blood God Legion forever. Long Yachu faltered slightly upon hearing this. He was going to leave someday? In her memory, all truly exceptional soldiers would choose to stay here and serve the Legion generation after generation. She was born here and had spent her entire life here, and she'd never thought about leaving this place. However, her father's words had enlightened her. Tang Wuling was different from her, and he was inevitably going to leave someday. An indescribable feeling suddenly welled up in her heart, and she abruptly turned before rushing away. I have to ask him about this. Long Tianwu looked on as his daughter quickly departed, and he heaved a full-on internal sigh. Perhaps his daughter had developed feelings for Tang Wuling already. Thankfully, he cautioned her before it was too late, and he could only hope that she wouldn't go beyond the point of no return. He pressed down on the communicator on his desk. Major General, I have an order to announce with immediate effect. From now on, all accolades earned through secondary occupations will be increased by 120%, but those accolades can't contribute toward promotions. Only accolades earned through battle will be applicable for promotions. Yes. It would be far too easy for a Saint Blacksmith to earn accolades, and he couldn't allow Tang Wuling to rise up the ranks too quickly as that would not be a good thing for the Blood God Legion. Unbeknownst to Tang Wuling, Long Yachu's excitement had led her to do something that would shatter his dream of earning promotions through his forging skills. After Luni departed with her cannon barrel, Tang Wuling had thought that he'd immediately be inundated by a flood of customers, but that was not the case. Only in the afternoon did Luni bring 2 military officials to see him. Both of them were female military officials. One of them was a major while the other was a colonel. Neither of them said much. All they did was ask for quotes from Tang Wuling before asking him to forge a spirit-refined part for each of them. Thus, Tang Wuling displayed his enormous forging ability again, and forged a pair of high-quality parts in an extremely short time right before the astonished eyes of the 3 female military officials. After issuing him the required accolades, the 2 military officials didn't say much before departing with Luni. After that, Tang Wuling received no more customers for that day, and Long Yuizu didn't come to visit him again, either. That night, after ascertaining that there was no way he'd receive any more customers, Tang Wuling finally returned to his room. He was rather perplexed. Why was it that he hadn't received any more customers with his forging skills? What had he done wrong to result in this lack of customers? Only during the next day did he understand why this was happening. The reason was very simple. Luni had kept his forging room a secret. Everyone knew the value of a Saint Blacksmith, and everyone was also inevitably selfish to some extent. Luni had taken 2 of her friends to Tang Wuling for those spirit-refined parts in order to further test his abilities, and no one else came to employ his services after that as Luni and her close friends had gone back to prepare everything that they needed forged. They wanted to get all of their things forged before news of Tang Wuling's status as a Saint Blacksmith spread through the entire Blood God Legion. As such, when Luni returned the next morning, there were 5 female military officials with her, and the amount of work they brought was quite startling even to Tang Wuling. 3 of the majors wanted him to forge spirit-refined metals for full suits of battle armor, and for this purpose, they had taken out massive accolade loans the night before. Hence, this was undoubtedly a huge job. Would you like spirit-refined metals or spirit-refined alloys consisting of multiple types of metals? Tang Wuling asked. He was not a grandmaster blacksmith who was capable of simple spirit refinement, but instead, a Saint Blacksmith. The difference between the 2 lay not only in the ability to soul refine, but also the ability to easily forge spirit alloys consisting of multiple types of metals. For battle armor masters, their suits of 2-word battle armor were extremely important, as that was the true beginning for their suits of battle armor. A strong foundation would undoubtedly be immensely beneficial to them in the future. As such, among 3 female military officials in question, 2 of them requested for spirit alloys with 2 types of different metals, while one of them hailed from quite a wealthy and influential family within the Legion, and she chose spirit alloys consisting of 3 different types of metals. Taking into account all of the weapons that they were also requesting for him to forge, the total accolades he would receive from the jobs numbered in excess of 100,000. This was definitely a massive haul as those female military officials had to provide their own materials, so he was only being paid for his service. However, his excitement quickly fizzled out. 100,000 accolades would normally be enough to promote him straight to the major rank, but at around noon, someone from the commissariat came to his forging room and informed him of a decision from the higher-ups not to accept accolades earned from non-battle sources for promotions. This was very disheartening news to Tang Wuling, and it was quite apparent that this new rule had been implemented specifically to target him. He knew that the Legion was simply restricting from rising up the ranks too quickly through his forging, but he was still feeling quite frustrated. Thus, he made a decision and hung a sign outside his workshop, stating that he was only going to be taking soul refinement jobs from now on. Why? Long Yachu finally came to visit the forging room again, and she was quite bemused by the sign hanging outside. Tang Wuling silently extended his blood god bracelet toward her. These are the 12,000 accolades I borrowed from you to open this workshop. I'm returning the money to you now, and will still split the rest of the workshop's earnings 50-50. My apologies, but I don't want to take on too many forging jobs anymore. However, if you find anyone who requires soul-refined metals, you can bring them to me. Long Yachu was quite surprised by Tang Wuling's cold expression. What's going on with you? Didn't Sister Lini bring you a lot of work this morning? Tang Wuling replied in an indifferent manner. It was great in the beginning, but the commissariat informed me that the accolades I accrue through forging can't contribute to promotions. In that case, what use do I have for such accolades? I have more than enough to feed me for a long time already. Long Yachu faltered slightly upon hearing this. She hadn't been made aware of this yet, and she was quite stunned to hear this from Tang Wuling. Who did you hear this from? Could there have been a misunderstanding involved? Tang Wuling handed over the order that the commissariat had delivered to him earlier, and the red stamp of the Legion Control Center had been imprinted upon it. As soon as Long Yachu saw the signature of the person who had signed off on the order, her face turned deathly pale. She immediately understood that her father was behind this, and that this definitely had something to do with her. I'll go ask them about the details. Long Yachu immediately turned and rushed away. Tang Wuling heaved a faint sigh at the sight of her departing figure, but a sharp look appeared in his eyes. So what if they are prohibiting him from earning promotions through his forging? He'd just have to earn promotions through battle then. His blood god bracelet had just been updated by the people from the commissariat not long ago, and it had split his accolades up into the two categories. One of them would be for his forging, while the other was for the accolades he earned through killing abyssal creatures. The decision to only take on soul refinement jobs was not a rash one that was made based on an enraged impulse. Instead, it was a very well thought out decision. If he could earn promotions through his forging, then he wouldn't mind taking on more jobs, even if it was going to be quite tiring to him. He wasn't afraid of physical hardships anyway. However, if his forging couldn't contribute toward promotions, then he couldn't waste too much of his time on it. He had to rise up through the ranks as quickly as possible, so he had to conserve his time in order to participate in more battles. Of course, he was still going to complete the future soul refinement jobs to the best of his abilities. By the time Long Yachu returned, it was already night time, and the rims of her eyes were quite red, clearly indicating that she just cried not long ago. I'm sorry, Wuling, I wasn't able to convince them. Her voice was a little hoarse. Tang Wuling had just completed the medals required for the suits of two-word battle armor, and he smiled in response. That's all right. Look, I earned 100,000 accolades in such a short time. After we split it, we'll be able to buy a lot of good things. Also, exclusively taking on soul refinement jobs is the best use of my time anyway. At my current level, only through practicing soul refinement can I continue to improve. Perhaps more soul refinement jobs will come our way soon. It's just a pity that we won't be able to use those accolades to earn promotions. But then again, accolades are still accolades. We can save up some and make you a top-grade mecha. Chapter 947. Long Yachu raised her head to look at Tang Wuling with a meaningful expression in her eyes, and she bit down on her lower lip at the sight of the positive smile on his face. I'm sorry. Tang Wuling chuckled. What are you apologizing for? This is a decision from our higher-ups. Long Yachu suddenly became quite vehement as she said, but if I hadn't told my father about this, you'd at least be able to use these accolades for promotions before they found out. You'd at least be a major now. Tang Wuling made her way over to her and said, it's all right, Superior. I'm sure I'll be able to become a major quite quickly through battle anyway. If you want to help me, then take me to battle in the abyss as soon as you can. Long Yachu nodded and said, we should be getting into the practical battle stage of your special training anyway. Our special service department has a special right to enter the abyss, so I'll take you there tomorrow. You have quite a sizable number of accolades now, so we'll go and buy some equipment tomorrow as well. All right. The next morning, Tang Wuling hadn't even finished cultivating his purple demon eyes before Long Yachu came to his living quarters to find him. Beneath that cold exterior of hers was a really kind soul. Superior. Tang Wuling hurriedly made his way downstairs. Let's go. I'll take you to the commissariat. Long Yachu seemed to have already mentally recovered, and she was looking completely reinvigorated after a good night's rest. The commissariat was responsible for all of the equipment in the Legion, and when Tang Wuling and Long Yachu arrived, there were some employees there, but no other soldiers of the Blood God Legion. We're here to buy some equipment. Long Yachu displayed her Blood God bracelet. Please select what you'd like to purchase. An electronic touchscreen appeared before both of them. Long Yachu explained, some pieces of equipment are mandatory, such as abyssal shielding barriers. Only with this device can you not be affected by the destructive aura of the abyssal plane, thereby allowing you to use your martial soul. Otherwise, your martial soul would be virtually inaccessible to you. This is a piece of standard equipment, so it's quite cheap. It'll only cost you 100 accolades. But in reality, the Federation expended a vast amount of money to develop these things. She chose a headband-like object for Tang Wuling as she spoke. That was most likely the abyssal shielding barrier that she'd been referring to. Next, you need to choose some protective equipment, such as a spatial rectifier. After being activated, that device will instantly warp the surrounding space. When you find yourself surrounded by abyssal beings, it will play an important role in warping space in order to create an opportunity for you to escape. Oh, and you'll be needing this as well. It's a masking singlet, and after you put it on, it will release fluctuations akin to abyssal aura fluctuations, which will make it impossible for abyssal creatures to sense you with their spiritual power or auras. It won't conceal you, but it's a must-have for people in the special service department like us, so you should get one of these too. Long Yachu began to choose a series of equipment for Tang Wuling as she spoke. Almost all of the equipment here specifically targeted abyssal creatures, and in Tang Wuling's opinion, the most practical pieces of equipment were the masking singlet and the abyssal shielding barrier. Those two items would allow him to unleash his full power in the abyssal plane. Do you require any long-range weapons? Long Yachu asked. Tang Wuling shook his head in response. Not at the moment. By the way, can we use mechas when fighting abyssal creatures? Long Yachu nodded and replied, of course you can. However, it takes a vast amount of energy to conceal the auras of mechas, so generally speaking, everyone will carry mechas with them, but they won't use their mechas unless absolutely required. Mechas would usually only be used in dangerous situations or to kill enemies quickly in order to make an escape. Tang Wuling had mentioned mechas as he recalled the fighting style that his teacher, Mu Yi, had adopted. Mu Yi had told him that he had lost his opportunity to become a hyper Douluo due to his obsession with mechas in his younger days, but he also told Tang Wuling that mechas were extremely important in modern battle. Many battle armor masters ignored this, thinking that battle armor was superior to mechas in every way, thereby making the latter redundant. However, Mu Yi's theory was that battle armor and mechas could be used together. If the two could be integrated well, then the combat prowess of the soul master would be significantly enhanced. Tang Wuling was very much in approval of this idea. If the Atlas Douluo had possessed a red mecha to complement his four-word battle armor, perhaps he would have survived the disaster that had befallen Shrek Academy. As such, Tang Wuling had always been searching for an opportunity to craft a powerful mecha for himself. The yellow mecha he had was most definitely no longer suitable for him. Both the offensive and defensive abilities of yellow mechas were simply far too lackluster, and with his golden dragon body, as well as his suit of battle armor, his defensive prowess already exceeded that of the vast majority of black mechas. Under these circumstances, he had to think about which direction he wanted to go and if he were to craft a mecha for himself in the future. In terms of equipment, Tang Wuling only took the mandatory pieces along with some disposable soul tools such as soul bombs. It was always advisable to have a good supply of such things. He didn't have too much of a concept of the power of soul tools in the past, but after Shrek Academy was destroyed by the Godslayer missile, he finally understood why soul beasts had been forced to the verge of extinction. Human soul weapons had truly been developed to a considerably terrifying degree. There were limits to human powers, but weapon technology would continue to develop, and there would most likely come a day when human weaponry would even become powerful enough to destroy the entire planet. With enough Godslayer missiles, Tang Wuling had no doubt that it would be possible to shatter the entire planet. The Federation had decided to only create 3 of those missiles, partially due to a lack of resources, but a fear of oneself most likely played a role in that decision as well. The 2 Godslayer missiles had completely laid waste to Shrek City, and that incident would most likely spark even greater fear towards soul weapons. According to Tang Wuling's knowledge, more of the Federation's technological power was currently focused on research toward aircrafts. As for the extent that research had developed, that was not something that he was aware of. Is that all you're going to buy? Those miniature mechas are actually quite good as well. They possess the combat prowess of purple mechas and also have many assistance abilities such as radars and things like that. I think it'd be a good idea to consider them. Long Yuexu suggested. Even though Tang Wuling had bought a lot of disposable equipment, he'd only spent several thousand accolades in total. He currently had tens of thousands of accolades under his belt, so this sum wasn't all that significant to him. Long Yakshu had accepted half of Tang Wuling's earnings, but she refused the repayment of her initial investment that he offered to her. Nor did she oppose his decision to exclusively take on soul refinement jobs. This is all I'll get for now. I'll adjust my inventory according to what's required in battle. Tang Wuling replied. All right. Long Yakshu nodded and said, truth be told, it's already quite rare for a newbie like you to have so much equipment. Also, you'll have me by your side to protect you. You're going to protect me. Tang Wuling turned to her with a surprised expression. Long Yakshu gave him a faint smile, but offered no explanation. Let's go. From today onward, I'll be taking you to experience real battles in the abyss. However, you have to remember that after entering the abyssal passageway, you have to follow all of my orders. Otherwise, you'll be punished according to the rules of our legion. Her expression was completely serious as she delivered this warning. Tang Wuling immediately nodded in response. Yes, superior. He knew nothing about the abyssal passageway at the moment, so following Long Yakshu's instructions was undoubtedly the best way for him to proceed. At the very least, he could accrue experience by following her. His top priority now was to familiarize himself with the abyssal plane as quickly as possible. After exiting the commissariat, Long Yakshu led Tang Wuling directly toward the rear of the Blood God Legion base. After exiting through the rear gate of the base, she tossed a pair of skis at Tang Wuling. Do you know how to use these? Tang Wuling replied with a wry smile. Not really. Long Yakshu smiled and reassured, with your bodily control, it won't take you long to get used to these. Come with me. Spread your feet open and use the skis to decelerate. She had already put on her skis as she spoke, then slid down the snowy mountain first. There were thick layers of snow everywhere on this entire mountain, so these skis were definitely the best transportation instruments in such an environment. Tang Wuling was rather unaccustomed to them, and the skis immediately carried him quickly down the slope. Long Yakshu was using her skis to control her speed and direction in an expert manner, but Tang Wuling looked as if he were almost diving down the slope. However, he wasn't fearful in the slightest. With his suit of 2-word battle armor, he could always sail and fly up into the air if the situation demanded it. This stretch of snowy land was quite smooth, and even though he was constantly accelerating, the good thing was that there were no obstacles that appeared in his way. Tang Wuling was watching what Long Yakshu was doing and trying to implement her movements himself. His body was swaying incessantly, and he almost fell over on many occasions, but he was able to stabilize himself through his own immense muscular strength. Chapter 948. He gradually began to master a few techniques, and he began to control his center of gravity, swaying from side to side in order to decelerate somewhat. After skiing for around a quarter of an hour, Long Yakshu suddenly yelled from up ahead, "The abyssal cave lies up ahead, so begin decelerating now." She controlled her skis in a well-rehearsed manner to slow herself down, but Tang Wuling didn't have her slick skills, and he was still hurtling onward. Right at this moment, something tightened around his waist, and Long Yakshu appeared behind him, pulling on his clothes with both of her hands to drastically arrest his momentum. In doing so, she was manually helping him to decelerate. Your skiing skills are top-notch, superior. The two of them finally stopped around 100 meters away from the massive cave up ahead, which had a diameter of over 3 kilometers. Long Yakshu removed her skis as she said, "This is a basic skill in our Blood God Legion. You'll get used to it after you come here a few more times." Tang Wuling nodded in response. Indeed, he would definitely be able to grow accustomed to this type of skiing given enough practice. Long Yakshu said in a serious voice, "The abyssal passageway is just up ahead. You remember how to enter it from your trial, right? This place is the same as the place that was simulated in your trial, but it's bigger, and there are far more abyssal creatures in there than in the simulation. Make sure to constantly be on your guard and follow my orders at all times. If we encounter enemies that are too powerful to defeat, and I give the command to retreat, you drop everything and retreat right away. Understood?" "Yes." Tang Wuling nodded in response. Long Yakshu stopped in front of the gigantic cave, and Tang Wuling stood beside her as he looked down into the depths of the cave. A world of inky blackness lay down below, and the occasional rumbling boom could be heard coming from inside. The snow surrounding the cave would occasionally fall into the abyss, and there were also many massive ice stalagmites around the cave. This gargantuan cave was like a massive mouth that was capable of devouring anything and everything. Long Yakshu pressed her right hand against her chest, and Tang Wuling immediately heard a string of clicks and clangs. First, a small piece of metal split open in front of her chest. Immediately thereafter, pieces of metal began to unfold, and they quickly encapsulated her entire body. She had just activated a miniature mecha. The mecha covered her entire body, and it only appeared to be around 3 meters tall, which was far smaller than normal mechas. There was a pair of folded wings on the back of the mecha, and there seemed to be powerful streams of air erupting from under feet, causing her to hover in the midair. You have a suit of 2-word battle armor, right? Release it now. You can't afford to hold back down there. Also, activate your abyssal shielding barrier and masking singlet. Tang Wuling did as he was told, and he immediately felt a layer of invisible energy being released by his metal headband, and the layer of energy enveloped his entire body. Meanwhile, bursts of strange fluctuations began to emanate from his masking singlet, and those fluctuations possessed a special frequency, which was undoubtedly imitating that of the abyssal plane. Pieces of golden armor then quickly began to spread over his entire body at his behest. Even though Long Yakshu had already guessed that he was a 2-word battle armor master, she still couldn't help but be entranced by the massive wings that spread open on his back, and her eyes were practically glowing. What a beautiful suit of battle armor. I've seen suits of 3-word battle armor that don't look as lavish as yours. After we go back, you can help me forge some materials for my future suit of 2-word battle armor as well. I also want to become a 2-word battle armor master as soon as possible so I don't have to rely on this miniature mecha anymore. Sure, Tang Wuling immediately agreed. His suit of 2-word battle armor had been constructed from alloys consisting of 3 types of different metals, and he'd obviously added some extra components to it as well. The suit of battle armor didn't just look lavish, its splendid appearance stemmed from the fact that it had more circuits carved into it. Tang Wuling was extremely prodigious, and his body was able to handle far more energy backlash from his battle armor compared to that of the average Soul King. So his suit or 2-word battle armor naturally provided far greater enhancements than normal suits of 2-word battle armor. This was entirely decided by his powerful physical constitution. He spread open his wing and activated his soul power to rise up into the air. The golden scales on his suit of battle armor were entirely basked in a golden hue from the light being reflected by the surrounding snow. Long Yakshu's miniature mecha was slightly taller and broader, but compared to his suit of battle armor, her mecha looked like a suit of beggar rags. Let's go. Long Yakshu repressed her envy and also thought to herself that Tang Wuling really did deserve to be the leader of the current generation of Shrek's 7 monsters. Just his suit of battle armor alone was extremely extraordinary. After spreading open his wings, Tang Wuling leapt forward and followed Long Yakshu into the cave. Long Yakshu was basically sliding down into the cave along the rock face. Soon, waves of electronic fluctuations scanned toward them from down below, and their Blood God bracelets lit up of their own accord. This was undoubtedly due to the devices that the Blood God Legion had installed down in the abyssal cave to facilitate identity verification. Long Yakshu had told Tang Wuling that following many years of effort, the Blood God Legion had built up an extremely powerful defense system around the outskirts of this abyssal passageway, and the system was effective against living beings both on the inside and on the outside of the passageway. If abyssal creatures were to try to rush out of the passageway, then they'd immediately be struck by devastating attacks, and this was also the final line of defense in the abyssal passageway. The members of the Special Service Department had certain special rights, so they were granted passage, and soon, the two of them descended onto that massive net down below. Tang Wuling had once asked Long Yakshu what lay below the net, and Long Yakshu had told him that that was the true abyssal passageway, and the most powerful abyssal creatures could only come out with a wide enough passageway. As such, all of the most powerful beings among the major powers at the time joined forces to seal the passageway, leaving only the small one behind. Within this inky black passageway, there were 2 corps worth of troops situated on guard duty here all year round. The Blood God Legion didn't have many soldiers, but all of them were the best of the best, and they were also given the most advanced equipment. During these past several millennia, they'd been constantly guarding the Douluo continent against the abyssal plane and averted many major disasters. Long Yakshu didn't ask Tang Wuling to walk on ahead and protect as she did during his new soldier trial. Instead, she led the way and strode into the passageway on this occasion. The inside of the passageway wasn't in a state of complete darkness, as there were lights situated at regular intervals. This was clearly a safe zone, and all of those lights had been installed by the Blood God Legion. Soon, they encountered some soldiers from the Blood God Legion, but the Special Service Department signal being emitted by their Blood God bracelets granted them free passage. After continuing onward, they arrived at the first passageway platform. This place was a world of metal with all types of soul tools set up in the surrounding area, and there were even metal resting chambers. Long Yakshu said in a low voice, there are currently hundreds of abyssal passageways, of which only 36 are of the highest level. Those passageways are the ones that lead to the most supreme abyssal life forms. For example, the demonic enchantress that you encountered is one of those supreme abyssal creatures. That one was only in its infantile stage. If it had been a mature demonic enchantress, we would have been killed in an instant. Mature demonic enchantresses are really troublesome to face even for titled Douluos, and they're also the smallest in stature among all of the supreme abyssal creatures. It said that the past ruler of the abyss was a demonic enchantress. Tang Wuling asked, where are we going now? Long Yakshu replied, the abyssal passageways are split up into the S, A, B, and C tiers. This is your first time here, so we'll naturally be going to a C tier one. Those passageways are all quite narrow, so only weaker abyssal creatures can pass through them. As such, we won't be in a lot of danger there, and you'll be able to familiarize yourself with the abyssal creatures. All right. After informing the troops stationed here of where they were going, Long Yakshu led Tang Wuling into a passageway that was only just taller than an adult human. Chapter 949. Long Yakshu continued as she walked. The troops stationed here are changed once every month, and there are a total of 10 corps in our legion with around 1,500 soldiers per corps. This is the main battle unit. Units like our Special Service Department are separate from this and are considered to be a part of the assistance battle unit. The rest are the logistical and research personnel, which are up to around 10,000 people in total. Hence, the total number of people in the legion has always added up to somewhere between 25,000 and 30,000 people. For newbies like you, even if you join the main battle unit, you'll only be a backup soldier. The experience that we've accumulated during the past several thousand years have allowed us to drastically decrease the number of casualties compared to in the past. Generally speaking, after a month of special training, a newbie will go through a year during which they'll be a backup soldier. Only after progressing past this 1 year period will a newbie truly be allowed to step onto the battlefield. Your situation is rather special as you're quite powerful, and that was why you were assigned to the Special Service Department. This was also an arrangement made with the intention of getting you to familiarize yourself with battling in the abyss as quickly as possible. Only after passing through 3 more points that were guarded by soldiers did they truly enter the abyssal passageway. The lights up ahead had become very dim and faint compared to the light behind them. This light comes from the abyssal passageway. We're currently in a C-tier passageway, so we shouldn't encounter any overly powerful abyssal creatures. You'll definitely be able to handle them. Facing real abyssal creatures is going to be a little different from battling them in simulations. Have you ever fought real soul beasts? Probably not. Have you participated in any competitions? In any case, just remember that all battles you fight against abyssal creatures are battles of life and death, so you absolutely can't afford to hold back. You also have to be extremely vigilant and take advantage of any opportunities that come your way. This is not a drill. Even though Tang Wuling had brilliant power and aptitude, Long Yakshu had seen many exceptional prodigies struggle to adjust after coming to the Blood God Legion. The continent had always been in a period of peace, so there weren't really any opportunities for soul masters to engage in real battles. In contrast, this was a true battlefield between humans and abyssal creatures, and it was certainly no joke. As such, she was presenting constant reminders to Tang Wuling in an attempt to make him take this situation seriously and not grow complacent through arrogance. Arrogant people were often the ones who died the quickest. Tang Wuling gave no reply and merely nodded in response. After advancing for around another kilometer, Tang Wuling estimated that they had already traveled 7 to 8 kilometers in total. There was a type of faint spatial energy fluctuations within the abyssal passageway, as if the passageway itself were an alternate spatial plane rather than something constructed from substantial rocks and soil. This was most likely why the abyssal plane couldn't access other places. The situation was akin to the spatial passageway piercing a giant tube straight into the Douluo continent, and they could only travel to the continent through this tube. Now, the main tube had been sealed, so they could only search for some branches to enter through before attempting to open up the main tube. Prepare for battle, Long Yakshu yelled in a serious voice, and at the same time, light flashed from her hands before a soul weapon appeared in her grasp. This appeared to be a massive gun with a length of over 2 meters, and the barrel of the gun was especially long, but it was slightly thinner than the high-frequency cannon barrel that Tang Wuling had once prepared. However, he could sense that the energy fluctuations imbued within this weapon were extremely fearsome, and he felt threatened by it even with his incredible defensive prowess. After this soul gun appeared in her hands, Long Yakshu's aura instantly changed. It was no longer cold and aloof. Instead, it had completely vanished, and even the threat that Tang Wuling was detecting from her gun had disappeared. It was as if she had become one with the air around her, but she was clearly standing right there. Tang Wuling couldn't help but admire her aura concealment skills. Tang Wuling had never had a chance to familiarize himself with Long Yakshu's abilities. He could only roughly sense that her aura belonged to that of a 5-ring soul king. Tang Wuling was a student of Shrek Academy, so he'd always been pitted against opponents of higher cultivation ranks than himself. So in his heart, there was no way that Long Yakshu's combat prowess would be superior to his. However, at this moment, his conviction in that belief wavered slightly. Long Yakshu was most likely more powerful than he imagined, and she had definitely reached her military rank at such a young age through her power. After summoning her weapon, Long Yakshu's speed also increased. The tips of her toes gently tapped against the ground, propelling her forward in a fast yet completely soundless manner. There were node-like places situated at regular intervals down the abyssal passageway. These places were like stone chambers, and they were also the ideal places to battle from. After passing another node, Long Yakshu suddenly stopped and looked down at the device in her hand, then made a hand signal toward Tang Wuling, indicating for him to remain quiet. The tail of her soul gun rested on the shoulder of her miniature mecha, and she held onto the gun with both hands. She stood in a very stable manner, and her aura became even more feeble. Even her breathing seemed to have completely cut off. She was standing still on the spot like a stationary statue. All of a sudden, Long Yakshu sprang into action. Her body rotated slightly, and a burst of grey light instantly erupted from the gun in her hands. The streak of light was far too fast for the naked eye to trace, and even with his purple demon eyes, Tang Wuling was only able to just barely catch sight of a silver shadow that vanished in a flash. Just as Tang Wuling was wondering what was going to happen next, a piercing cry suddenly rang out in the distance, and a greyish-black living being appeared within the darkness. This was a lizard-like creature that was entirely greyish-black in color. There were sharp-hooked spikes growing all over its body, and one of its eyes had already been destroyed, presumably by that grey streak of light. Its body writhed and spasmed as it screeched, and not long after that, it dissipated into a cloud of greyness that flew straight into the depths of the abyssal cave. This was the first real abyssal creature that Tang Wuling had ever seen, and he flashed forward to stand in front of Long Yakshu. At the same time, he withdrew his wings and battle armor, but pulled out his golden dragon spear. Be careful. Long Yakshu's cold voice sounded beside his ears. I will. Tang Wuling pointed his golden dragon spear forward before advancing further into the passageway. There appeared to be more types of abyssal creatures than he'd imagined. At the very least, he'd never seen that lizard before. However, through his studies with Long Yakshu, he knew that this was a type of abyssal creature known as an engulfment lizard, and these creatures were very adept at concealing themselves. They were considered to be a prominent race among abyssal creatures, and they devoured the life force energy of all types of living beings for sustenance. There were powerful beings within their race that were comparable to demonic enchantresses, and there was an extremely vast number of them, all of which had drastically different levels of power. They also possessed extremely powerful defensive prowess, and their eyes were their only weakness. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Right at this moment, several figures sprang toward them like lightning. These were also engulfment lizards, and that came as no surprise as these beings had always been known to be social creatures that lived in groups. After the first lizard was killed, its companions naturally charged forward to face the enemies. Tang Wuling swept his golden dragon spear through the air, and countless spear projections instantly filled the entire cave, encompassing the oncoming engulfment lizards. A string of dull thumps rang out as one engulfment lizard after another had their bodies punctured by the golden dragon spear. After the golden dragon spear pierced through their bodies, bursts of grey energy would try to escape from these engulfment lizards, but instead of successfully fleeing the scene, these bursts of energy were absorbed by the golden dragon spear and reciprocated into Tang Wuling's body. Following a filtering process conducted by the golden dragon spear, Tang Wuling was reciprocated with pure energy. Tang Wuling's eyes narrowed slightly, and he immediately understood what was happening. After these abyssal creatures were killed, the vast majority of their energy would be recovered by the abyss. As such, regardless of how many of these abyssal creatures were slain, they could most likely be reborn within the abyss. At the same time, he had verified through practical combat that the energy of these abyssal creatures really could be absorbed through the use of his golden dragon spear. These engulfment lizards didn't possess anywhere near enough energy to effect any notable changes within his body, but it was certainly better than nothing. Chapter 950. If he were to purely enhance his own physical constitution by consuming spirit items, then that would be far too wasteful. Long Yakshu held her gun as she stood behind him, and she was quite reassured at the sight of his broad shoulders, as well as the calmness he displayed while killing those engulfment lizards. He wasn't fearful in the slightest even in the face of an actual battle, so he clearly possessed a lot of practical battle experience. Not bad. Tang Wuling looked down at his blood god bracelet. He had slain 3 engulfment lizards, and that had earned him 30 accolades. Tang Wuling continued onward, and engulfment lizards sprang toward them relentlessly, only to be converted into energy and accolades for him. After passing through a tunnel that was around 500 meters long, Tang Wuling had killed over 40 engulfment lizards, earning close to 500 accolades. This was his first relatively substantial haul earned through battle in the abyss. The more Long Yakshu observed him from behind, the more astonished she became. The combat prowess that Tang Wuling had displayed when facing these engulfment lizards was extremely stable, and all of his attacks struck either the eyes or the heads of these lizards. The heads of engulfment lizards were comparable in hardness to certain alloys, but his golden dragon spear was able to pierce through them without any trouble as if they were made of tofu. What incredible melee combat prowess. Long Yakshu was gradually able to relax a little, and the two of them arrived at the second node in this passageway. Compared to the previous node, this one was slightly larger. It was a cave with a diameter of over 50 meters, and the spatial energy fluctuations in the surrounding area were quite intense. As soon as Tang Wuling entered the node, he was greeted by the sight of a pair of greyish-white eyes that were filled with deathly energy. This was a massive engulfment lizard that was more than 10 times the size of the engulfment lizard that they fought before this. Its body was over 7 meters long, and was entirely covered by thick grey scales. These scales were constantly opening and closing while emanating faint grey mist as the creature inhaled and exhaled. Be careful, this is an engulfment lizard of a far higher level than the ones we faced before. The mist it emits is extremely versatile and can manifest into anything from armor to weapons. Try not to let it get close to you, Long Yakshu cautioned in a serious voice. Tang Wuling rushed forward in a flash while pointing his golden dragon spear up ahead. At the same time, he released his golden dragon body, and golden dragon scales instantly appeared all over his skin while his hands transformed into golden dragon claws. His eyes were also shimmering with golden light, and the massive engulfment lizard let loose a low roar as the mist emanating from its scales suddenly became denser. The mist surged forward rapidly, and just as the golden dragon spear was about to pass through it, the mist suddenly congealed, enveloping the spear in the process. Tang Wuling felt as if he plunged his golden dragon spear into a swamp, and at the same time, the dense grey mist was surging toward him in an attempt to completely envelop him as well. Right at this moment, a loud boom erupted, and the massive engulfment lizard let loose a roar of fury as most of the dense mist around it instantly dissipated. Its massive body was also sent flying right after the resounding boom, and Tang Wuling didn't even have to look to know that Long Yakshu had just shot it with her gun. Melee combatants fighting at close quarters while long-range offensive units covered them from a distance was a very standard battle tactic employed in the military. Tang Wuling raised his left arm and made a hand signal to indicate that he had everything under control. He then shook the golden dragon spear in his hand, and golden light erupted to dispel all of the grey mist. Following another flash of golden light, the spear had already been plunged into the engulfment lizard's head. A burst of energy that was countless times richer than that of the energy in a normal engulfment lizard immediately surged into his body. The massive engulfment lizard also quickly vanished, but none of its energy was able to escape back into the abyss. This really was a fantastic place for cultivation. Tang Wuling couldn't help but grow rather excited. At this moment, Long Yakshu arrived beside him and cautioned, "Don't get ahead of yourself. These abyssal creatures can't be judged using normal logic. At times, opponents that are seemingly quite weak can create huge problems for us." Tang Wuling nodded and said, "I'll keep that in mind, but you don't have to be in such a hurry to step in. You can cover me after it becomes apparent that I'm in a dangerous situation." Long Yakshu harumphed, "So this is how you repay me for helping you out?" Tang Wuling couldn't help but burst into laughter. He could tell that Long Yakshu was extremely competitive and was either consciously or unconsciously comparing herself against him. He glanced down at his blood god bracelet to find that he'd received 50 more accolades. The only downside in Tang Wuling's mind was that there weren't all that many abyssal creatures within this small passageway. They continued onward toward the next tunnel, but just as he was about to enter it, a strong sense of foreboding suddenly welled up in Tang Wuling's heart. With his spirit of his realm's spiritual power, he had far sharper senses than the average person, and he plunged his golden dragon spear forward without any hesitation. A golden dragon erupted forth along his golden dragon spear, and he'd unleashed his golden dragon shocks to heavens. Even though the attack was quite rushed, Tang Wuling was so adept at using the golden dragon shocks to heavens that he still managed to unleash at least 70% of its power. A resounding boom rang out as a figure was blasted deep into the tunnel, and Tang Wuling only caught a brief glimpse of a pair of crimson eyes. His body flashed forward as he entered the tunnel, and at the same time, he released his golden dragon body while golden light erupted from his eyes. Only after entering the tunnel did he manage to catch a clear glimpse of their enemy. This was a very strange-looking creature with a rhomboid body and 6 sets of claws. He immediately realized that this was a 6-clawed demon that Long Yakshu had told him about in the past. This type of abyssal creature was very adept at concealment and unleashing sneak attacks, and they also possessed immense defensive prowess, as evidenced by the fact that this one remained largely unscathed despite being struck by Tang Wuling's golden dragon spear. It plunged its 6 sharp, long claws straight into the ground, and immediately thereafter, a dense expanse of spikes began to emerge from the ground beneath Tang Wuling's feet. Each and every one of these spikes were very sharp and thin, and imbued with powerful destructive energy. Bam bam bam. A string of explosive booms rang out, and the 6-clawed demon's crimson pupils abruptly contracted. It had struck its target with its attack, but that string of booms had come entirely from its spikes being shattered. Tang Wuling didn't even bother to evade as there was no way those spikes would be able to pierce through the defenses of his golden dragon body. He let loose a cold harumph as he stomped his right foot violently into the ground. A massive boom rang out, and all of the surrounding spikes were shattered into countless pieces. Immediately thereafter, the golden dragon spear in his hand was sent flying, and the 6-clawed demon had only just been flung up into the air by the force of his stomp when it was pinned to the ground following a flash of golden light. A series of golden halos erupted from the golden dragon spear, and after it returned to Tang Wuling's hand, it immediately reciprocated him with the energy of the 6-clawed demon. Tang Wuling looked down at the dual-tip spear in his hand with a very pleased expression. The fact that it was constantly reciprocating him with energy meant that he would be granted an extreme abundance of stamina. Not only was this energy replenishing his blood essence power, even his soul power had been replenished quite significantly. Tang Wuling was already beginning to feel that serving at the Blood God Legion wasn't going to be a painful experience. Instead, it was a brilliant opportunity for him. Only then did Long Yakshu arrive in the cave, just in time to see the 6-clawed demon being slain by Tang Wuling's golden dragon spear. She could also take care of a 6-clawed demon on her own, but she was more adept at long-range combat, and 6-clawed demons had extremely powerful defensive prowess, so it would have taken her a while to kill it. She gave Tang Wuling a thumbs up and asked, "How do you feel?" Tang Wuling smiled and replied, "I'm not really satisfied." Long Yakshu rolled her eyes in response. "You're still not satisfied? What else do you want? Let me tell you this, the most arrogant newbies are always the ones who die the quickest, so don't be overly conceited. There are countless prodigies who have served in the Blood God Legion, but only the prodigies who survive are true prodigies. I understand that. Let's keep going." Tang Wuling strode on ahead. Long Yakshu followed along behind him, and she was slightly entranced by the sight of his broad shoulders, his ramrod straight back, his crisp white military uniform, and his shimmering golden spear. She felt as if this man was completely identical to the image of the perfect future lover that she envisioned countless times in her mind. However, at the same time, her father's words of warning also surfaced in her mind. He was indeed incredibly outstanding, but at the same time, he was bearing a far heavier burden than anyone else. From her own selfish perspective, she'd rather have him a little less exceptional than he currently was. Perhaps those burdens wouldn't fall onto his shoulders then. Tang Wuling was naturally oblivious to what Long Yakshu was thinking. The rewards that he'd reaped from killing abyssal creatures had filled him with battle intent, and he was striding onward in an eager but still cautious manner. Through the observation of his purple demon eyes and immense spiritual power, he slew several more abyssal creatures. They didn't grant him much energy, but it was more than enough to replenish the energy he was expending. It took a lot longer for them to reach the next node as the abyssal creatures along the way were far more powerful than the engulfment lizards they'd first encountered. Thanks so much for watching this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Also leave a comment down below with suggestions on what novels to read.